It's time for this week's Uplift. Three ordinary guys that want you to find the freedom that is available by knowing our Lord Jesus Christ. So sit back and enjoy Uplift, brought to you by the Fulcrum Center. Visit our site at thefulcrumcenter.org.
Yeah, I thought it interesting. It discusses, it basically says, unless the Lord build the house, they labor in
Labor.
vain who build it.
Mm-hmm.
And then it talks about the watchman on the wall, that the watchmen on the wall watch in vain, trying to protect the city. And then it kind of ends strangely. It talks about children, that children are a reward from the Lord.
Hmm.
But the interesting thing that I was thinking about with regard to that scripture has to do with just our work, right? It kind of reminded me of Colossians 3, whatever we do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus. Right? And so I've been thinking a lot about the concept of work and the work that we do. And I think that the Lord's desire for us, with regard to that, is that he has to be involved in the actual building of your life, the building of your house, but he's also involved in the protecting of it, the protecting of your family. So if he's not involved in those things in your life, then everything you do is pointless. He says in verse 2 of Psalm 127, it says, in vain you rise up early and stay up late, eating the bread of toil, for he provides for his beloved ones even in their sleep. And then he goes in talking about how children are a heritage of Adonai, of God, and the fruit of the womb a reward. And I started thinking about how important that is, and how important that is to recognize our work, where protection comes from, even the perpetuating of family. And my wife mentioned something to me earlier this week. She was talking about our posture before the Lord, how important it is with regard to like Hannah, who did not have a child, and she goes and presents herself before the Lord to have a child, and says she will give this child to the Lord. And of course, God honors her prayer, and she has Samuel.
Mm-hmm.
But the importance of her posture before the Lord. And so I think that a lot of this all kind of relates, right? What is our posture before the Lord with regard to our work? Where do we think our security comes from? How do we think about our children, right? Do we see our children as a reward from the Lord, or do we curse our children unknowingly, or worse, knowingly?
Okay.
Like, I,
Go ahead, Chad.
I was going to say that speaks to me on a couple of levels right now
Yeah, me
because,
too.
yeah. So the first this is striking to me, and actually I forgot that this even existed. This psalm and what it says, because unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. And so, as Phil knows, I'm in the process of building a cabin right now. I'm not physically building it with my hands because I have to work a day job. I'd love to be building it with my hands, but anyway, we're in the process of we've bought property and we're building a cabin for a family member to live on, and this is a person in need, so we're going to try to help them meet their need to have a place to live. So, and it's become very clear this week that I was pushing the rope. That's a
Mm-hmm.
real technical term that I've used a lot. But I was pushing the rope. I was pushing God's rope because Like I'm like I've got this big checklist of things I'm doing, and I'm just running down this checklist, making phone calls and moving and shaking and stuff like that, like I'm used to doing in the workplace or wherever. And then pretty soon, like I've just got roadblock after roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, people not returning calls and all those sorts of things. And I texted Phil this morning and I said, well, God's slowing me down. And there's a reason for it. And it's Psalm 27. Thanks, Robert.
Well, yeah, I can tell you why I started thinking about this psalm. I've been thinking a lot about finances and wealth and how I have really not understood it in my life and how I have really been a consumer. I have been an excellent American. I have really taken a lot of what's come into my household and just consumed it. And and I recognize, and this is maybe dumbing this down a little bit, but it just kind of follow me here because I think God used this as a discipline for me personally because I started thinking about, okay, God, so what needs to happen? And as I've been studying, I'm recognizing, follow me here, that I need to produce. I'm going to use this. This is a term I came up with. I need to produce the goose.
The golden
Producing the
goose.
goose means this. If you remember the Jack and the Beanstalk,
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah.
where he brings the mother, like he brings the goose down that lays the golden eggs. And so I remember reading that Dave Ramsey brought this out before. He talked about how you create this nest egg, and then what that does is that creates golden eggs, and you get to determine the golden eggs. And then he warns, but if you give the goose away, you lose your ability to give. So there's a responsibility in giving. Well, what I recognize in my life, I have no goose that produces golden eggs. See, I have no assets, I have nothing built up. I haven't produced a goose. I have basically received eggs and continued to disperse them. And so I recognized in my life, I started thinking long and hard, man, I need to produce the goose. I need to start creating things in my life that create legacy for the family so that it's this wealth building situation where I can actually be responsible for giving so I can give into God's kingdom, right? I can give into legacy for the family and just make sure that if we produce the goose that we don't give the goose away, but you can feel free to give the eggs away. Well, as I'm thinking about that, that's when God reminds me of this psalm. And he tells me, right, except he build the house, you labor in vain. Right? Except he's the watchman. So many times what I think about a lot is sometimes we try to produce the goose, we try to build things in our life without the Lord. And then we get real nervous about it and anxious about it because we recognize, like, when our economic system looks like it's going to crash and burn, and we get really concerned about that. And so we get really concerned about our portfolios and our retirements and all this kind of stuff. And what God is basically showing us is not only does he need to be the one that builds it, he also is the one that has to protect it. Because otherwise, as we try to do that, it doesn't mean we don't try to go towards those things. I think as we work for the Lord, God has created us to create and cultivate in our world. But as we work for the Lord, it needs to be him. It needs to be his. We need to make sure that we don't try to own what God already owns. Right? We have to be careful not to declare what God owns as ours. And then God kind of used that as a discipline. Like, hey, not only is he the one that needs to build it, he's the one that has to protect it because true security comes from him, not from, not only can I not produce the goose on my own, I'd have to have God's help, but I also can't protect the goose and keep it alive without him, right?
Right.
So I think God was giving that to me as a discipline.
Okay. That's good.
It is good, and I guess it depends on your definition of a goose. Because from
Yeah.
where I sit, like like you may not have the financial goose, Robert, but you have a family legacy of relationship with God goose, shall we say?
Oh yes, yeah. The goose can be. It can be any type of goose, right? It can. I think there are several types of geese.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's different ways to see that production and to see those things. But even that, yeah, like it has to be. And I think that's probably why the writer of Psalm starts thinking about children. That legacy you try to leave behind,
Mm.
and why that's also from the Lord. Like you just the that's got to be part of that fruit, right? Like that's got to be part. So you try to do something where that ministry aspect goes forward.
In these days after the election, there are people that are saying, I can't understand how somebody would vote for this person or that person. And then this sort of thing goes on all the time. I can't understand how a Christian would, excuse me, be willing to abort a baby. And believe me, I'm on board with that. But what I'm getting at is, I sit back and like, I don't care who won the election. Yes, feel very strongly about abortion, but my biggest thing is, and I see now after what you just said, is I was trying to build the goose. I don't understand how people can live this life without a relationship with God. And that's what I strive to do, is help people have that relationship. But in some way, have I been trying to build the goose? That's something I need to ask the Lord. Because though He's given me great skills and talent and an ability to relate to people, to help them, maybe the goose is there and I'm looking for something greater and it's producing, or I'm trying to produce something beyond or I'm not looking for Him to help me produce it. So this is good. I'm glad you brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
And it relates to what Jesus said as well. Remember what He said in Matthew 7, that if you build your house on the rock.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what He said? He said His rock He's the rock, and it's His
Right.
teaching. If you do what He says, if you obey, when the storm comes, your house lasts.
Yeah.
But if you don't build it on Him and what He says, when the storm comes, you're on the sand and it won't
Get washed
last.
away. Right.
See, no legacy. There's no legacy there without Christ.
Right. Right.
And it says, "Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman keeps awake in vain. It is vain for you to rise up early, to retire late, to eat the bread of painful labors, for He gives to His beloved even in his sleep." So it's, that's all important, because basically He's saying if you work hard without His, how do you want to say, if you work hard without His guidance or direction, you're working and toiling in vain.
Yeah.
That's it.
And there's
Striving
so
after the wind.
yeah. And there's so many people in our country and our society and our world that are toiling in vain. And everyone has their own ideas of things, and this election is a perfect example.
Yeah.
So we've seen all sorts of people say all sorts of things and have all sorts of reactions post election, and now everyone has their own opinion of what the future is going to look like. Well, if we were all rooted in a vision of what God's future is, then it would all that would all be very secondary. you know
So
Yeah.
true. So
and
true.
and my day job is I'm supposed to try to speculate on behalf of the organization, to try to choose opportunities and to strategize and procure contracts and all these sorts of things based on what I perceive the future to be. And like, so if like, God doesn't just hand it to me on a piece of paper. You
Right.
know?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Right? It doesn't work like that. And so like but I do sow and reap over the business. You
Oh yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, Lord. And it's incredible to watch, because I can tell you specifically over the past years, like, okay, God, like if you want this, then it's kind of like, who was the fellow that laid down the cloth and the dew and
Gideon.
all that?
Gideon.
Gideon.
Did.
Yes. I sort of pulled a Gideon move. I was like, all right, God, like if you want us to do this, then do this. And God could not have been more profound in doing this. Like I was like, whoa, and it wasn't what I thought. It was not what I
Mhm.
thought. And so I was like, wow. And it sort of in a way it wasn't what I was hoping for. So
That's good. Yeah.
it's like, okay, well, I'm going to click the seat belt and just, throw my hands in the air and ride this roller coaster,
Oh yeah.
So it's like, sometimes God's always very honorable, but sometimes it just, you have to
Yes.
laugh because if we follow his direction, if we have a vision for what he wants, which comes by hearing and quieting ourselves to listen, then we know usually what direction that he's
Mhm.
taking us. And again, so putting this in a practical perspective, if we keep awake in vain, which means we stay up late working hard or thinking or whatever, like I've been doing this past week in vain, and then in vain we rise up early, like you try to, early bird gets the worm kind of a thing. Retire late, eat the bread of painful labors. He said he gives to his beloved even in their sleep.
Yeah.
So there are people who just very simply rest in God and come out ahead, to your point, the stock market or your 401k or your
Yeah.
IRA or whatever. To your point, the people who truly trust in God, they could wake up one morning and that IRA is
Yeah.
miles ahead of the people who scraped their knuckles and banged and worked
Hmm.
and all that.
Oh yeah.
You could just fall into it because of God's uh, blessing and mercy.
That's it. And I'm
Grace.
gonna tell you, that is the hardest concept for me to trust the Lord with. But
Yeah.
he says it all throughout Scripture. All throughout Scripture. Think of what he gave to Israel when they are in Exodus, when God delivers them out of slavery, he establishes for them the Torah, which tells them take a break. One of God's laws is to rest.
Hmm.
It's a law of the Lord, right? Like, how many people do you know? Like, hey, the police said you are too active, and if you don't stop and take a picnic, like we're going to give you a ticket for working.
Mhm.
I mean, like what? And so, but we get so caught up. And so, what God was actually, it's very interesting because what he's showing is all the gods of this world were in Egypt.
Hmm.
Every god you could possibly imagine, right? Polytheistic world. And they demanded your production, nonstop production. And there's no grace, there's no rest. It's just production, production.
Hmm.
So what can we know about the gods of this world? It will demand your production.
Hmm. Wow, that's good.
What does God tell us there, right? Like, so he delivers them from those gods and says, but this is who I am. And he says, if you will take a break, I will bless you more than if you worked 7 days.
Hmm.
Right. And it's like something about that rest. Not only did God give them a Sabbath every week, but he also gave them 7 holy days to take a break. right? He gave them several types of rest, right? So lots of things where he gave them times when debt could be cleared. He gave them time. So there's this times of rest in several different ways, and that it sets them free. And so I don't think we like I know I haven't to grab hold of this concept that if I rest, it gives me the opportunity to produce more in 6 days than I will in seven.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up because for a long time, I struggled with that because first I said, it's hard for me to rest on Sunday because I'm preaching. And then I
Mm-hmm.
said, wait a minute, but the biblical Sabbath is Saturday. So I try to rest on Saturday, but I got all these things I got to do. And what I realized was I was being legalistic.
Mm-hmm.
God said to rest. Now, sure, biblical Sabbath is Saturday. Okay, I don't think we can take that away. But God always deals in physical and spiritual. So what I started doing was I made sure I did nothing in the evenings on Tuesdays. That's my day. And now when Monday comes, I think, oh, I don't have to do anything tomorrow. I
Mm-hmm.
am not going to visit anybody. I'm not working on my sermon. I'm not doing anything tomorrow because it's Tuesday. And it has changed me drastically.
Oh
So
yeah.
I keep telling God, I say, if I'm wrong, if I should be doing this on Saturday or Sunday, then let me know. But so far, He's honoring the fact that I'm
Mm-hmm.
taking that break.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so the Jewish Sabbath was right. It was 6 in the evening on Friday to 6 in the evening on Saturday.
Hmm.
If you think about the Jewish day starts at every day starts in the evening,
Hmm.
right? So every day they have starts at 6 in the evening. Have you thought about what that looks like? That means you come home from work, right? You start a new day by what?
By
Eat
resting.
dinner with your family,
Yeah.
and then you go to sleep,
Yep.
right? So your day starts with dinner with your family, you talk with each other, you pray with each other, you go to sleep, and then you wake up and work.
Yep. Well,
So
we got it
see, the
backwards.
Jewish concept's completely different, isn't it? It's like you start
Yeah.
your day with rest to give you what you need for the day, right? And so like we don't think of it in those terms, but that's kind of I think the way we were supposed to, and that's why Jesus even tells them he's like I didn't make the Sabbath so you would serve the Sabbath. I made the Sabbath so it would serve you, right? The
Yeah.
Sabbath is your servant, right? And so because that rest is needed. And so if we're not careful, we get so caught up in labor. See the curse of the ground,
Mm.
the curse of our toil. We get so caught up in the curse of it that and we dedicate ourselves so much to it, we make it a god. That
Mm.
God's like, no, you need rest. Yes, the curse exists. Yes, there are gods of this world, but it's not about I do want you to create like God's command is to create and cultivate, but not at a place where it is laborious to where it literally is killing us. Right? Like
Mm.
it's taking life away from us. God is always life-giving in principles.
Well,
So,
think about
That's
it
very
then this
true.
way too. When you think
So
about the
true.
American culture and the history of American culture, I think that like we were raised to value work and work hard, work hard, work hard. And at some point that's okay. But when you think about it, when you're working hard, what are you not doing? You're probably not investing time and listening to God and reading His Word and all those things
mhm.
because you're working hard. So like when I first started my career 25 years ago, 26 years ago, like you were in the fast lane, express lane culture of hard work. That's just kind of the way it was in American society. And so it was like you had to outwork this person, and that was the culture. Everything was work, 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 work. And so look at what's happened to our society. So I mean, the percentages of people, the number of people going to church is way down, and we have all these rampant problems in society we talked about earlier on. We have all the moral issues of abortion and all these things. Well, and people are walking out around like burned out zombies, and they're further away from God than they ever have been in many cases. So you could say that when we focus on working hard, and working hard, and we think we're getting ahead, we're missing the opportunity of spending time with God, where God can change your entire life, your entire situation in the snap of a finger, just overnight, in a moment's time. If you heard his voice and followed his word when he gives it to you, your entire life could just change in a moment. Like maybe God's trying to get you to take a certain job, or maybe he's trying to get you to do this or get you to do that would drastically change your life in many ways. And to your point, Robert, about a legacy or whatever. But when we get caught up in that hard work, we might miss it, And the other
Yeah.
thing too is God does everything pretty much for his glory, right?
Absolutely.
So like why did God put Chad in his job and Phil in his job and Robert in his job and whatever? Well, it's because he wanted to, for whatever reason. If we're truly doing the thing that he wants us to do, we're doing it for his reason. And his reason isn't always the same in every case. Like he wanted Phil to be a millionaire, and Robert and I just to sit and toil in the soil all of our lives.
That's not fair, because there's people that are listening that can't see the look on my face right now.
He wanted Phil to be the millionaire, and the rest of us just work for Phil.
Yeah, God's vision for Phil was to be a Methodist millionaire.
Well, no,
Oh
yeah, but
my.
think about that psalm, right? So the trust we're supposed to have is that we're supposed to be able to sleep and get that rest, knowing God produces, knowing that the security is from Him, the production is from Him. So, God created us to create and cultivate. But when you're stuck in cultivating all the time, it's always got to be bigger and better. You become exhausted, and you have no innovation. You have no way to create anything new. You don't have any new ideas. You're just exhausted. And so your labor is just in vain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's the hardship is, if we're not careful, we just have a bunch of exhausted people who even if they wanted to create something, are too tired to.
Mm. Wow.
Good.
Yeah. Very good. So, hey, let me tell you real quick my Gideon story, since you brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of told us a little bit in Bible study a few weeks ago at First Church, but I didn't go into all the details. So, I know I'm going to give you some fodder here, Chad, because this is back to my time in that Messianic movement. I know you love to talk about that. But anyway, I was spending the night in a tent, and it was in October. It was the Feast of Tabernacles, and I thought I was pleasing the Lord because I was following the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, I was told, well, you don't, if you can't do the whole week, just do a couple days. God will honor that. I mean, I was hook, line, and sinker falling into this, okay? So one night, I was like, it didn't feel right. Discernment kicking in. Something's not right. God was not happy. I said, God, I'm going to take my flashlight. I'm going to set it outside. If in the morning it has dew on it, but the ground doesn't, because I didn't have a piece of cloth. I wasn't going to throw my underwear out there. God, if it has dew on it, but the ground doesn't, then I'll know I'm doing the right thing. Guess what happened the next morning? No dew on the flashlight or on the ground in like a big area, nothing. So it didn't satisfy either side. And I looked up and I was like, oh, I'm underneath a tree. Okay, Lord. So the next night, I take my flashlight, I set it outside the bounds of the tree. Same thing, Lord. If there's dew on the ground, but not on my flashlight, or no, on my flashlight, not on the ground, then I'll know I'm doing the right thing. So I get up in the morning, you wouldn't believe what I saw. There
Your
was
wife saw your flashlight.
Frost underneath the tree, completely dry ground, completely dry flashlight outside the tree because the sun had come up and burned off all the frost, but except for underneath the tree. So I was like, I give up, Lord. Well, it wasn't until probably 2 or 3 years later that he brought it back to mind. He said, you realize what I was saying to you? Like, you didn't want me to do either. It wasn't about what I was doing. It was about growing closer to him. So he didn't really answer it because there was I didn't ask the right question, first of all. It wasn't whether I should be just sleeping in a tent or not. It was all about getting to know him more and working with him in my life a whole lot more. Unfortunately, it took me probably another 10 to 15 years to really fully grasp that concept and do it, but and I'm still working on that.
Man, Phil, I wish we would have been friends back there, buddy. I would have asked you all cut there. I have so many questions. Like, did you rip the Kmart tag off your tent before you slept in it? You know, like, did you have 2 types of cloth?
Oh yeah. You know, and there was somebody who did question me on that. Like, what, you can't wear a cotton polyester blend? And I said, I'm not familiar with that one. But I found it.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And what am I supposed to build ramparts on my roof so make sure nobody falls off? I was like, I don't know that one either.
Oh yeah. Did you have tassels hanging anywhere? Oh.
They were given to me, but I never put them on. Because
I
I was told, don't put them on unless you are going to never take them off.
Yeah.
So I never put them on.
They actually gave you tassels to wear.
Oh yeah. This guy wanted me in deep. And the Lord kept me out of it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It was a wilderness time for me, for sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate the Jewish culture, but I am fully understanding I am not Jewish.
Exactly. Yeah. And, you know, I've learned so much. I think that gave me a good foundation for the appreciation of Jewish culture and how it became what it is now in Christianity, that I can look back and I can say, well, I understand why God did this or that. Yeah. But it was never the end game for God. Do you know what I mean?
I
it was always to show.
It's always about what it's about, right? Like,
right, exactly.
So when you do something without the recognition of why, like the point God is using here, then it's always kind of heartless, right? It's almost like a works righteousness, and God has never been into works righteousness.
Right. Right. And I mean, I was very, let's see, I was young in my faith. I was a believer, didn't really know what it meant to have a relationship with God at that time. Mm-hmm. And that's how I fell into it, because I was seeking. I knew there was something more than what I was experiencing. And I knew I had this temper in this, and I knew God wanted to change this. So I was like, okay, God, what is it? And the devil said, oh, here, I'm God. Here's what you want to do. You want to follow this guy. And I latched straight onto that bait and took it. And thankfully, God reeled me in and said, okay, let's talk.
You didn't just open up to the book of Galatians and start reading out of Galatians, did you? Like,
well, no, you know what? It's funny because that was one book that I knew better than any other. I had studied that book more than any other book, but I wasn't seeing it. And that's
you weren't seeing that you were the Galatian.
I was working in vain because God wasn't building it. God wasn't watching the wall or protecting the wall. I was watching in vain. I was building in vain. And it all came crumbling down.
We've all been guilty of that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
And I praise God now that He did make it tumble, because I learned a lot, but I learned what I mostly learned was how important it is to talk and walk with Him daily.
And you never got dew on your flashlight.
I never got dew on my flashlight. Never did.
You
Oh,
know
man.
why? Because God was like, "What are you doing?" Like Moses
Yeah.
never had a flashlight. Moses didn't even have D batteries.
I, did, I just didn't have a piece of cloth that I could put out there.
Yeah, you
Oh,
could have went in
man.
the house and asked your wife for a wash rag. You
Oh, I
know.
wasn't. I wasn't at home. I was at some park
Oh,
where
oh,
this
Man.
guy that was teaching me all this stuff, he was planning on being there the whole 7 days, and a few of his friends were being there the whole 7 days, and yeah, and they were eating cheeseburgers, and
What?
oh,
Oh, no.
no,
How dare they?
no! Did they
oh
slaughter a
Man.
bull?
huh?
Man.
Did they slaughter a bull?
No, that's barbecue. That's how they responded to that one. You know, I asked about the sacrifices, and it was, "You ever have a barbecue?" I was like, "Okay, yeah, it made sense to me." But
No.
so
Mhm.
I understand that we know what we should do. We know what the truth is. We know to give it to God. But there are some times we just don't do it, and I don't know
Totally.
why.
Mm.
I'll tell you a neat vision I heard a guy had that we recently had a revival, and a missionary came in, and he had discussed this guy who had this vision about his work. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. So, you can take this or leave this, but I thought it was pretty interesting to think about. But this is what he said the Lord showed him, that the Lord took him to awe and showed him all of his work, all of the stuff that represented his work, and it was going through a furnace. And as it went through a furnace, at the bottom there would be gold that would come out of it, and the rest of it was burning off.
Hmm.
Well, he noticed there wasn't a lot that was coming out, but the gold that was coming out was forming into a crown.
Mm.
Well, so all of it that formed his whole life had gone through this furnace, but the crown that was left was tiny. It could fit on his pinky.
Mm.
And everyone was lined up to present their crowns to the Lord. And he felt so ashamed because his was tiny, right? And so the expression I think that the Lord was obviously trying to show was work towards the Lord, right? That you may present yourselves, right? As hey, this was for you, Lord, right? Not that
Wow.
God is,
Yeah.
judging us on our deeds, but at the same time, Jesus, it's kind of like that concept of Jesus telling us to store up treasure in heaven, where moth and rust don't destroy, right? Do an eternal work, something that will last forever, not just something that we think we need now.
Mm.
Otherwise, we may be laboring in vain.
We have such a narrow, we talked about this in the past on this podcast, it's such a narrow view when we live, 70, 80, 90 years, maybe 100 if we're lucky, and there's all eternity. It's
Mhm.
like a pin drop. Not even that. You need a microscope to see our lives and the amount of time we've spent in eternity.
Yeah, I think that's true. As we mature as Christians, we have to. A true mature Christian has an eternal view.
Yeah. Yeah.
They
Absolutely.
live each day with an eternal view. So whatever happens on this earth, it happens. And it's crazy for nearly all of us to think about, but that's true. I mean, the apostles probably felt that way. Especially later in their lives, like you know, I'm here to do whatever I'm here to do, but this is just short term.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, think about that last argument they had, right? The argument they're having when Jesus is about to die. Who's
Yeah.
the greatest in the kingdom?
Yeah.
Right. Well, so in one sense, it's kind of like, you got like a V8 moment of like,
Yeah.
wow, why are you even discussing this in this moment, right? Nobody mentions Jesus, by the way, which I
Mhm.
find suspicious. But like the greatest is at the table. Nobody goes, well, he's the greatest. We're
Right.
asking who's the second, right? Like
Right.
no, nobody says that, right? And so, but I think there's also a quality of that where their mind, they're at least thinking eternally,
Mm.
right? They're thinking, well, look, if I'm going to serve Christ, man, I'm going to give it all, and I want to be the greatest in the kingdom. Like in the kingdom that matters, it's worth everything, right? It's worth giving up everything. So I want to be that.
Yeah.
So I think we could have a dose of that, right? No
Right.
Christians, no, if we really understood this concept and understood our work versus what's in vain and what's not, I don't believe any believer should be distraught over election results,
I agree.
whether it went your way or not, right? Whether it went your way or not. If Daniel can thrive in Babylon, we have no excuse as to why we cannot thrive in America. Every believer in the world is thriving no matter what government they serve under, not because the government and what it does, but because of how good our God is.
Hmm.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people that are, exuberant about, their person won. But even when your person wins, they can make decisions that you don't like.
Yeah.
Oh,
And that,
yeah.
they can make a lot of decisions that you don't like. So, they may have a very strong belief in a certain thing, but they may go completely against what you want them to do in a different way. Or they may not do what they said they were going to do, or all sorts of things.
Yeah. Let us recognize the importance of giving things to God because, I mean, I may bust some bubbles here, but every person that was voted into the government is a sinner.
Mm.
And that means every single one of them is corrupt, just like I would be if I was voted in.
Yep.
Yeah, we're all
So
people.
we're people. Every single one of us is corrupt. So the recognition is, yeah, if you don't build your work on the Lord, it's all in vain anyway. And so to the election. If you don't, do work right now for the Lord, it's not about so much the person as much as God's working through them, right? So I mean, the reality is like we're all corrupt, and all of us have to take our work and commit it to the Lord, or we will have nothing presented to Him that's worth anything in the kingdom.
Right. So if we
Unless
try to produce the goose, we're going to produce a corrupted goose.
that's right.
Yeah. Unless the Lord produce it,
Right.
unless
Right.
the Lord build it. And
Right.
I think you see some ministries like that, right? Think about some ministries where the person has died, but the ministry continues,
Absolutely.
Hmm. Oh
right?
yeah.
So think about that. Think about these beautiful ministries that were produced, no doubt because God gave them the ability to do so. And
Hmm.
so he keeps that going. So that's going way after they're done, right? So
Right. Right.
think about the blessing that Paul still receives as people preach from the writings that the Lord had him write.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Think about the
2000.
blessing he still gets for that, right? Like that legacy, right? So there's a produced goose right there, right?
That's a lot of royalty.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of gold coming out of that furnace.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a good way to look at it, though,
Yep.
because the Lord produced it and He allowed Him to.
Yep.
Ah, good stuff tonight.
Yeah.
What people didn't see before we started recording was we said a little prayer because we sat around for almost 20 minutes trying to decide what to talk about, and then we said a prayer, and again we put it in God's hands and He produced for us.
Hmm. Right?
Amen.
All right, guys. Well, it's been great tonight talking with you.
Mm-hmm. It's
been
been a
good.
good episode.
Yep. Always is. Always is.
Amen.
And as usual, we get as much from it as our viewers.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if we get more.
Mhm.
I did speak to one viewer this week and said that he really enjoys watching us because we have such a unique perspectives, and so hopefully he'll say the same thing about this one.
That's right.
Very good.
That's right.
All right. Well, next week is not Thanksgiving, right? Yeah. So we will be back
We'll be back.
next week. We have to decide. Maybe we'll decide next week if we're going to have an episode on Thanksgiving night or the week after. Whatever. We'll decide.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. We could have a short special of some sort.
Yeah. There you go. That's what we could do.
Thanksgiving special.
Yeah.
Here we go.
All
That's
right.
good.
Yeah, it's a good idea. All right, gentlemen. Good talking to you.
Yeah. Have a great week.